Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, as always, and this is episode number 189 of the Baseball Podcast. I appreciate you guys listening in. It is Monday, May 18th. We are 1 week from Memorial Day out there as we continue this stay-at-home quarantine, continuing to flatten the curve and hopefully get back to baseball as soon as possible. And in regards to baseball, we got a lot to talk about here today. We're going to start out the show talking about the memo that was sent from the owners to the players. More and more details are becoming available based on the return to play proposal that is, being floated around out there. We're then going to discuss the best of the best. The best team in Major League Baseball history will be crowned today. We're going to do the World Series, break down the playoffs, and then do the World Series. Discuss some continued ramifications monetarily based on Major League Baseball moving forward. And then we're going to wrap up the show talking about documentaries that I would like to see, with the Michael Jordan, The Last Dance documentary coming to its conclusion on Sunday the 17th. I thought to myself, what other documentaries would I want to see out there? What else would I be, looking to watch in regards to baseball and learning more about? So let's jump right in. The top of the show here, talking about the memo, the reports from The Athletic, from ESPN, some of the details that are continuing to become available about the safety protocol. We're actually going to talk about safety and the players and not just money. We'll get into that a little bit more during the fifth segment here, but actually conversations starting to happen around how they're going to do this, what's the protocol look like, where are they at moving forward, and it was very, very detailed looking at some of this memo according to reports out there, and we've talked about it in the past, but one of the most important aspects is going to be testing and the availability to test for these players. Once again, Major League Baseball, as well as every professional league out there, is worried about the optics of taking away testing from the general public or healthcare workers who are having difficulty getting tested, and then they're going to be doing 10,000 plus tests a week. It just doesn't look good right now for where we're at as a country, and that's a ton of tests. If a person shows any type of symptoms, they're going to be tested, and let's just continue down the list here, and a lot more is going to jump out as kind of eye-popping for you out there. But no high fives, no fist bumps, no hugs, no celebrating. So even you guys watching the KBO out there, the Korean League, the Taiwan League, they're still high-fiving, fist-pumping after home runs. Well, none of that will be taking place here in Major League Baseball. There's going to be no spitting, no sunflower seeds, nothing like that coming out of your mouth. No engagement in regards to the players and the coaches, such as if there's a guy on second base, no going over and talking to him. The third base coach isn't allowed to go up to the player when he's on third base, or even the first base coach, probably just hand over the batting gloves. That's about it, but no conversation. That leads me to believe mound visits are not going to be a thing. That was not reported anywhere, but if the third base coach can't talk to the runner at third base, I don't see why the pitching coach would be allowed to go out there and talk to the pitcher and discuss a plan of attack moving forward. So no engagement between players and coaches. Here's one for you, but there will be a new baseball thrown into play in any event in which multiple people touch the ball, and that's beyond the pitcher and catcher. So base hit to left field, ground ball to shortstop, over to first base, whatever it is. Anytime a ball is put into play, they're going to get a new baseball out there. So, it's going to be a ton of turnover. And then also there's going to be no throwing it around the diamond. A pitcher strikes out a batter, catcher to third, to short, to second, back to third, around the horn. Well, none of that's going to be going on. So it's going to be a weird optic to be watching a baseball game, see a strikeout, and then just see the catcher lob the ball back to the pitcher. Everybody kind of walk around. Okay, one out. It's just, first base. He goes over to short, second, third, back to the pitcher. None of that in between every out. So it's going to be a little bit of a less pretty sport that we'll be watching out there. But no throwing it around. The umpires are going to wear gloves as well as face masks, I believe. But the memo also suggests to the players that no post-game showers. There's going to be no post-game buffet. Basically, it's going to be a pre-packaged meal that they'll be able to take with them and enjoy back at the hotel. They're not allowed to take ride-sharing services, Uber or taxis. I've been with a lot of players who Uber to and from games. That will not be allowed anymore. They'll have to be on the team bus. But instead of only 2 team bus opportunities, early and late, there's now going to be upwards of 6 different times in which the buses will be leaving the hotels to accommodate all the different players and to try to maintain as much social distancing as possible. In regards to the personnel on the field, the conversation we've had here about you're talking rosters, essential personnel, the amount of people that will be allowed into the ballpark. Well, there will be a tiered breakdown system, 1 through 5, with tiers 1 and 2 being allowed to be at the ballpark on game days and involved in the situation by the calculation of Major League Baseball and I guess working with the ownership. That wasn't detailed, but that's only my assumption. Looks to be about 100 individuals per team will be ranked on that tier 1 and tier 2 basis. So you're looking at upwards of 200 people at the ballpark, plus local cable, announcers, media. So 250, 300 individuals at the ballpark putting on one of these shows. And that's a big deal when it comes to Major League Baseball and what they need to do moving forward, because we've heard about the bubble, everybody being Arizona, then it was Arizona and Florida, Arizona, Florida, and Texas, and those just continue to go by the wayside due to the amount of money that it would cost. It just, they need to be in their local stadiums due to the local revenue and local TV contracts that they have, but it's just exponentially more dangerous and allows a ton more individuals to be involved, as well as you have the state of California, who's basically said we're not going to allow professional sports until we figure this thing out. Arizona's come out and said, hey, come on down, we'll take you. Florida, hey, you're allowed to do it. California is the opposite. They're saying, wait a minute, and you got 5 professional teams in the state of California. So if you have to relocate all 5 of those teams, is each one of them going to Arizona? Are they all going to the greater Phoenix area where we talked about they have all the spring training complexes and availability for facilities and things like that? Or are you spreading them out throughout the West and kind of putting them in minor league ballparks, AAA stadiums, depending on capacity and availability for the media and things like that? It's just going to be a wild next couple of weeks, because as we're looking at it here, May 18th, we're about 3 to 4 weeks away from that June 10th mark where they're trying to get individuals and pitchers and catchers to report 2.0. For that to be the case, a lot of this is going to have to be ironed out in the next couple of weeks. It's going to have to be done by the end of the month here to allow everybody to kind of understand what the situation is and what they're looking at moving forward. But continuing through the memo here, players will be taking their temperatures multiple times a day. Coming up in the next segment, we'll do a little bit of a run-through as to what the life of a minor league baseball player may look like during this. They'll need to be wearing masks everywhere, including during workouts. If they're in congested areas, whether it's throwing, hitting, weightlifting, they're going to have masks available. No eating out on the road at restaurants. You'll have to eat at the hotel or take the leftovers from the stadium home with you. But it's just a lot of detailed information, and I think it's a good thing. I think Major League Baseball, this is a conversation that should have been happening last week before the money conversation dominated the media, because this is what everybody's worried about. And this is what Blake Snell's talking about. This is what all the players are talking about, that the risk is on the players and not the owners. And that led to the money conversation. But everybody still asks, money doesn't matter if you can't safely put a product out there. They're going to have to continue to work with local governments, state governors here in Philadelphia. Philadelphia County and the surrounding counties are still in the red phase of a green, yellow, red reopen stage, just due to the number of new cases, the amount of the virus per capita, things along those lines. And it's going to be close to see if July would be back to where they could do that. And if Philadelphia is still in the yellow, can they put on professional sports as a one-off? It's just a lot of conversation. Dr. Fauci's going to have to be involved, federal government, local governments, testing, all of the above. It's going to be a wild couple of weeks here. So we're going to have a lot to talk about, which is good news at the GSMC Baseball Podcast. But that'll wrap up the first segment here. Like I said, touching on the memo that was released, we're going to go into a little bit more detail upcoming here in the second segment, go through a day in the life, continue to just think out loud in regards to if this can even be a possibility. Because, yes, people are optimistic within the industry with talking to sources, but it is very, very cautious optimism, because everybody knows as we open up, is there going to be a second wave? Are we going to have to shut back down again, be back at square one? Nobody really knows, but certainly stay tuned out there, because as more information becomes available, we're certainly going to share it out there with you guys, listeners, and I appreciate it. But this is Kevin Mahalik with the GSMC Baseball Podcast. I appreciate everybody listening out there. We're going to pause right now for a word from one of our sister shows, also a word from one of our sponsors. When we come back, continued conversation around the return to play proposal from the owners to the players. Stick around.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back, and thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. This is episode number 189 of the Baseball Podcast. Shout out to all the healthcare workers out there, all the essential workers, all the emergency workers, everybody working at the grocery stores, the gas stations, pharmacies, fast food restaurants, other restaurants, whatever it may be. whoever out there is listening is doing their best to keep America up and running and to keep our lives and my life as normal as possible. We appreciate everybody out there. Continue to give thanks. Continue to text, support. Things are a little bit crazy, depending on who you are out there, more so for others. I certainly appreciate what you guys are doing out there. So in this segment here, we're going to be continuing talk about the coronavirus return to play proposal between Major League Baseball and its players. It was just recently released that upwards of 10,000 tests per week, a ton of social distancing measures. A lot of it was the safety protocol involved, not so much on the field rules. We discussed that in last episode. The changes on the field, well, the changes off the field are certainly a little more crazy. So let me take you through a hypothetical day in the life of a Major League Baseball player in 2020. Essentially, you get up in the morning, you take your temperature. You take the thermometer that Major League Baseball is sending you, that you're going to have to load in an application, and I'm sure keep your temperature. If it's over 100 degrees, you have to self-isolate, call the team physician, and get ready for an exam. So make sure you do it before you work out in the morning. You don't want to be running hot and forget to take your temperature. But right out of bed in the morning, you're up doing that. If you pass that test, okay, you're allowed to go to the ballpark. Say you're traveling, say you're a Philly, you're in Florida, or you're a Dodger who's in Houston, whatever it may be with the East, West, and Central. Well, again, we talked about a first segment. You hop on the bus, one of the 6 buses scheduled, because you can't take the ride share, the Uber, like normal after getting lunch with a family friend or a buddy of yours heading to the ballpark. You can't do that. Once you get there, you have to go in a specific entrance that's only allowed to be used by the 200 people who are going to be allowed into the stadium. You have to put on a mask when you get into the stadium. Once you get there, your temperature will be taken again by personnel within Major League Baseball and within whatever organization you're in. If you pass that test, okay, then you're allowed to go to the field, the weight room, the clubhouse, the training room, whatever it may be to get ready for the game that night. You're allowed to do it at this point. It's just imagine, up until that point, this is probably 2:30, 3 o'clock. Temperature taken twice, medically examined a couple times, but just going to have the space and time, everything within the training room, back to college style, like I did at Lehigh, when you had a sign-up sheet in regards to who could see the trainer when, electronically through an app. Well, you're going to have to do that this time as a Major League Baseball player. And let's just say today, surprise, today's your day for a coronavirus test. There's going to be 1 or 2 of those a week, just randomly, as well as people who show symptoms. You could also get a monthly blood test for the antibodies to make sure, you didn't catch it and everybody missed it and your temperature never rose, things along those lines. You're not allowed to use hot tubs, can't use the cold tubs, the saunas, cryotherapy, the one where they freeze you really cold. You can't do that anymore. We can't have shared spaces. Which means you got to get to hitting at 4:30 because you don't have early work this time. You're allowed to use the iPad to check the pitching, look at the scouting report, but then that's got to be deep cleaned when you leave. Once you get to the field, you can take your mask off, but you have to have it on until that point. It may look a little bit weird, but no sunflower seeds, no Gatorade, no spitting water within the dugout. So everything there is going to be a little bit different. Then it comes game time at night. Well, there's no lineup card exchange, no meeting of the manager and umpires to go over ground rules before the game. All of that is going to be done electronically now. You're not going to be standing shoulder to shoulder for the national anthem. Everybody's going to be 6 feet apart, spread out. If you're a relief pitcher sitting on the bench, you're going to be spread out from everybody, 6 feet, 7 feet, remaining you're close there. If there's fans in the stands, maybe at the end of the year, they're spread out. But pitchers in the bullpen, you're going to have your own balls in the bullpen that you're responsible for, a handful of balls that are going to be cleaned and only used in the bullpen by certain players and things like that. You get out on the mound and you need a better grip on the ball. Well, you can't lick your fingers. Can't put that on the baseball, so you have to make sure you use the rosin bag. But they need each individual rosin bag for each pitcher because they can't share rosin bags. And, so you're a hitter. Okay, you're on deck. You're looking to put pine tar on your bat. Well, you can't have a team pine tar rag. Each player is going to need their own individual pine tar. Each team's going to need their own individual glue stick or whatever it may be. It's amazing just the detail when you think about all the common things that are used in baseball, even during or after the game. So, yeah, you play the game, the bullpen phone rings, you answer it, you got to disinfect it. You got to disinfect the water cooler every so often. And then, like we said, the game's over. Well, there's no post-game shower because you're not supposed to use the shower with everybody. There's no buffet. You're going to get a packaged meal after the game. It's going to be like being in the Texas Collegiate League again, back on the bus. Here's your Chick-fil-A sandwich after the game. Enjoy your waffle fries. Hopefully, you're not a vegetarian, so it's going to be things like that. Then you got to get on the bus back to the hotel because you're not allowed at any other restaurant or anything out on the road. You can't eat with family and friends, so you got to go back and either eat hotel food or have somebody bring it to you. You can't go out to eat. If you're at home, they're not going to dictate your time, so you'll be able to get back in your car and drive home. But it is highly recommended against going out to the bar or going out to the eat or being out in public because it's a safety concern not only for you but your family but for all of Major League Baseball. And basically saying, please don't go out on your own, and then you got to wake up and do it all over again the next day. Take your temperature twice, possibly get tested, and just it's a fascinating way to look at it, as an outsider's perspective, looking at the millionaires versus the billionaires, playing for the love of the game. Is there risk? Is there this? Is there that? There is. It's a ton of travel, and it's going to be a year unlike anything anybody has ever seen. Like I said, a few guys in the league, anytime they come around the Northeast, I see them because they're playing out west. Basically, it's the AL East, not even the NL East. So New York, Boston, Baltimore. If they're within distance, we go have some dinner, have some drinks after the game, before the game, whatever it may be. Well, none of that will be happening in 2020, even within the travel. This doesn't really discuss airports and things like that in regards to security, if they're going to have to go through the main terminals, if they're going to have to, go into crowded areas with luggage. How about the people handling their luggage? How will those be disinfected as they continue throughout, the world, not the world, America, going from Philadelphia to Miami and things like that. So just a fascinating time. And that's where, again, I'm more pessimistic than I think most people in regards to whether or not they're going to be able to pull this off, because I think the best bet they have to actually play the sport of baseball, if money wasn't an issue, if cable rights weren't an issue, if advertising wasn't an issue, it'd be to put them in Arizona and Florida, do the 2-league rule, have a meet at the end, that sort of style. But just with the amount of revenue, and we're going to get into specific numbers at the tail end of the episode in regards to the amount of money some teams are looking at losing without fans, and it's amazing how they're going that, we're going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars, and the reason we have to do this and have to get into our home stadium is for local revenue, local TV rights, local sponsorships. It's the only way not to go bankrupt if you don't have fans and that millions and millions of dollars coming in on a routine, regular basis. But it's going to be wild to see if this ultimately goes through. We discussed last episode how there's continued conversation around a back and forth. This isn't going to be a one-and-done presentation or proposal. The players are going to counter-propose. The owners will look at it, see what we're negotiating on, probably send another proposal to the players, and I expect 2 or 3 ultimately to be floated back and forth before a true agreement comes together between the players and owners. But I do believe it gets done. The alternative of no baseball is just so horrible for both parties, players and owners, not only for this year, but for the future as well, that a deal has to get done. And neither side's going to like the deal that gets done, but a deal has to get done because no deal is the apocalypse for Major League Baseball, and honestly would be difficult to come out the other side on. I know you're saying, well, what are you talking about, Kev? It's going to be difficult to be anywhere close and make anywhere close to the amount of money that it did pre-coronavirus if they don't come to an agreement and put a product out on the field, if it's possible in regards to safety. But that wraps up this segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, as always. Now we're going to transition into our best of the best team in Major League Baseball history. This Snakes segment, we're going to recap the playoffs and preview what we have as the World Series. So stick around. After a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows, we're going to get into it. It's going to be a lot of fun.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. It is Monday, May 18th, and this is episode number 189 of the Baseball Podcast. If this is your first time joining us, welcome in. Where have you been? Just kidding. We appreciate you joining us here. If you can do me a favor, scroll down on your iPhone, click 5 stars, write us a review. If you leave a review, we'll read it here on the show. If you're one of our regular listeners out there, welcome back. You guys as well. I very much appreciate you continuing to spread the word. Do the good deeds for the GSMC Baseball Podcast, as well as the podcast network as a whole. There's a ton of different offerings within the podcast network, not only within sports, but within beauty, within pets, within life, within money, within anything else you can think of. Hey, is there a podcast about that? Movies, music? Yes. Yes, there is, and it's available through the GSNC Podcast Network. So head to social media. That's where you can find all of those podcasts, all of those links, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn as well. We're posting on there. It'll take you where you need to be. You can follow, like, subscribe, rate, review, everything that comes along with 2020 podcasts, social media. You guys get it out there. I very much appreciate you guys continuing to spread the word so I can bring you guys quality content here within the GSMC world. But this segment, the best of the best team in Major League Baseball history. We're going to be recapping the playoffs. How did we get here? We're in the World Series. If you're just joining us once again, spoiler alert, but go back. The last couple of episodes, they'll be backlogged wherever you're listening to this episode. You can check out each division. Then we did the playoffs. Now we're at the World Series, where we're ultimately going to be breaking down who I think the best of the best is. So going to the National League playoffs, we went with the proposed 2020 format as well. 7 playoff teams, 1 team gets a bye, the rest of them playing a best of 5 and then a best of 7 and a 7 going through the playoff structure. So in the National League, the number 1 overall seed, the 1976 Reds, they got a bye in the first round, which meant the 2001 Diamondbacks faced off against the 2012 Giants, divisional foes, going at it here. And that's one of the things about this is you're going to get a lot of interdivisional matchups, which I very much enjoy when it comes to the postseason and some of the storylines and hatred that could go along with that. But the 2012 Giants, a very good ball club, put up a good fight, but ultimately Schilling, Randy Johnson, the D-backs moved on. Next up, we had the 1986 Mets and the 1995 Braves. This one got a little bit of pushback online. I had some people messaging about how good the 86 Mets were and how underrated they are, and it gets overshadowed by Bill Buckner, because if Buckner would have fielded the ground ball, they would have lost the World Series, but ultimately could have been the better team. A lot to get into there, but I like the 95 Braves, that rotation, Glavine, Smoltz, Maddox at the top, moving on in a best of 5 to the next round. And then you had the 1980 Phillies facing the 88 Dodgers. And, the 88 Dodgers, just the fact that that's the best version of the team based on the criteria, which was a World Series championship at the top at number 1. The Dodgers had a lot of very good ball clubs fall just short in regards to that category. So the 80 Phillies moved on. That means we had the number 1 seed 76 Reds going against the number 6 seed 95 Braves. Ultimately, the lineup for the Revs there proved to be too much in a deep series. Yes, the Braves rotation kept them in it down the stretch, but the Big Red Machine put a little too much on it there at the end of the series in advance. The 2001 Diamondbacks versus the 1980 Phillies. Again, being a homer, you know I wanted to go with the Fightin' Phils. Mike Schmidt leading the way, Steve Carlton at the top of the rotation. But the year Luis Gonzalez had in 2001, Schilling and Johnson, they break your heart as a Phillies fan, and they advance, which meant the National League Championship Series was the 76 Reds versus the 01 Diamondbacks. Again, the pitching for the Diamondbacks keeps them in it in a long series, but I think the Reds and the Big Red Machine moving on and win the National League. So let me know your thoughts out there. The 76 Reds, I've seen the 75 Reds. I had them 1-2 in regards to Cincinnati and their possible representative. I went with 76 just due to the fact that they were able to repeat, and I think that's a little more difficult. A sweep in the World Series that year. So that's your representative, and we're going to get into a lot more detail on how they match up with the AL champion coming up in segment number 4 when we dive into how ultimately this series would play out. But in the American League, the number 1 seed, the 1998 New York Yankees, a video game lineup, very deep. Excellent rotation as well. They earn a first-round bye. The number 2 seed, the 1984 Tigers, they faced the 2002 Angels. They took care of business pretty handily. I believe it was 4 games for the Tigers we had in this preview and prediction. The 02 Angels being a solid ball club, but falling just short. Then we had the 73 Athletics and the 70 Orioles. I had the 70 Orioles as a wild card team due to the 98 Yankees, but I had them winning this matchup, advancing to the next round in the divisional series. Those top 3 to all 20-game winners in a short series. I think the advantage is for the Orioles and over the Athletics offense when it comes to the playoffs. Pitching beats hitting. That's what we've seen, and the Orioles advance. Next up, we had the 04 Red Sox and the 05 White Sox. The Battle of the Sox. The 04 squad, Manny Ramirez, David Ortiz, Pedro Martinez, Curt Schilling lead the way for the Boston Red Sox as they advance to the divisional round to face with the Tigers. Next up, the divisional round, number 1, the 98 Yankees face the 1970 Orioles in what ultimately I think was the Yankees' toughest test in the American League playoffs. It just happened to be in the divisional round, but I think this could have been the championship series. The 70 Orioles and the 98 Yankees, it went the distance 7 games to where the Yankees' offense finally beat up on the depth of the Orioles' rotation beyond those top 3. Yes, they would start probably 6 maybe 5 of the 7 games. Well, those other 2, the Yankees take advantage and get the best of them in 7 games, with the Orioles offense falling just short of where they need to be to ultimately pull up another upset. But those 70 Orioles, the more you research, the more you look at it, what a great ball club that was. The 1984 Tigers faced the 04 Red Sox. The millennial in me, the 31-year-old, wanted to take the 04 Sox, but the historian and the researcher did his due diligence, and the 84 Tigers seemed to be the team that would advance. Just a little bit deeper in the rotation, a little bit deeper in the lineup, and the 04 Sox being down 3-0 to the Yankees, ultimately coming back. But you see, it could be beat, and it could be done, and that's why I had the 84 Tigers ultimately advancing to the ALCS, where the 1998 Yankees and the 84 Tigers, the 98 Yankees moving on in 6 games, taking care of business against the 84 Tigers. The rotations just didn't match up for Detroit. Ultimately, New York advances to the World Series. Well, they'll face the 1976 Reds. And that brings us to today. That brings us to this point where we're going to preview what the lineups would look like, go through the rotations, go through the bullpens, discuss ultimately who would take home the World Series and the best of the best here. But wrapping up this segment, I just wanted to discuss with you guys out there the criteria as well. It was pretty much the years 1970 on, because as I've done some research out there, looking at other individuals or media outlets who have done a best of the best style tournament such as this, a lot of them have the older Yankees, the 27 Yankees, Murderer Row Yankees, the 30s, the teens, a ton of Yankees back then. I wanted to keep things a little bit more relevant. There's also, who was it? The 30 or 34 Philadelphia Athletics, I think, were on the list. So there's a ton of teams previous to what we were talking about that could possibly be involved. But I did also see a lot of 75, 76 Reds, a lot of 98 Yankees, 84 Tigers. So people are on the same page out there. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed, this breakdown and this middle segment part of the show here over the course of the last month, as we're trying to bring you guys quality content while the pandemic continues to rain down on actual baseball out there, with the only live baseball continuing to be over in Korea and Taiwan. So a little bit of a simulation, a little bit of a fantasy world here. The 1976 Reds and the 98 Yankees. We're going to break down the lineups. We're going to break down the rotation. We're going to break down the bullpen coming up in the next segment. But that wraps it up for segment number 3 of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, as always. Thank you once again to all the healthcare workers out there, the essential workers, continuing to get it done, continuing to make the world turn. It's tough for us out there sitting at home as the weather is starting to get better wherever you may be in the country now. Even here in the Northeast, we're up into the 70s, so people are starting to want to get that itch to get back out there and get back to normalcy. But if we could just hang on for a little bit longer here, hopefully we can avoid a second wave and ultimately going back and hitting the reset button, which will allow us to have baseball sooner than later. So continue to stay strong, continue to stay safe, reach out to anybody you need to in order to make it happen. We're all here for each other. We love you. But that'll do it for this segment. Let's pause now. We'll be back on the flip side talking 76 Reds and 98 Yankees. Stay with us.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores a goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, as always, and it is finally time. It is here. Everything that the last month has been leading up to. In the middle of the show, segments 3 and 4, we've been going through the best of the best. We started from the team level, then we went to the divisional level, then we went to the playoffs, and here we are in the World Series. It is the 1976 Reds representing the National League and the 1998 Yankees representing the American League. It is the Big Red Machine versus the Yankees dynasty of the late 90s. And I thought the best way to break this down, I've kind of been going game by game in regards to who would start, who would play, but I wanted to look at a positional matchup here between the Reds and the Yankees. And how do they break down? How do first basemen compare, second baseman, and ultimately go through the rotation in the bullpen so we can discuss who would win a series in regards to these two teams. So let's jump right into it here at first base, going around the horn. The Reds run out Tony Perez. He hit 260 that year, 19 home runs, 90 RBIs at first base. The Yankees, they had Tino Martinez at 28 and 123, hitting 280. So an advantage there to the New York Yankees and Tino Martinez right off the bat when it comes to first base. Tony Perez had a heck of a career, don't get me wrong, really good ball player. But in regards to these specific matchups, he's going to fall just short. Let's see. Next up, second baseman Joe Morgan. He hit 320 with 27 and 111. Going over to Chuck Knobloch for the Yankees, 265, 17 and 64. Advantage Joe Morgan and the Cincinnati Reds. So we got a 1-to-1 matchup there in the lineup. Pete Rose at third base. He'll obviously get the nod. He hit 323. Only 10 homers and 63 RBIs over Scott Brocious, who hit 300 with 19 and 98. But it's Pete Rose. It's advantage Reds. Next up, we got the shortstop, Dave Concepcion, 281, 9 and 69 for the Reds, and Derek Jeter, number 2 for the Yankees, hitting 324 with 19 and 84. Advantage New York Yankees, and Derek Jeter were tied up again at 2 in regards to the lineup. Catching here, Johnny Bench for the Reds. He hit 234 this year with 16 and 74, but Johnny Bench in his prime, arguably one of the best catchers, if not the best catcher of all time, matching up against Jorge Posada, who hit 268 with 17 dingers this year. You got to go advantage Johnny Bench. Numbers are comparable, possibly favor Posada, but just knowing the individual and the type of player he is, Johnny Bench advantage Cincinnati Reds. Going to left field, George Foster hit 306 with 29 and 121 for the Cincinnati Reds in a strong year. That one will outlast Chad Curtis, who hit 243 with 10 and 56. So another advantage for the Cincinnati Reds to take the overall league. Going to center field, Cesar Garamino for the Reds here hit 307. Not a power guy, a little bit more of a speed guy. Only had 2 home runs from the center field position. Bernie Williams hitting 339 with 26 and 97. That's going to be advantage New York Yankees for center field with Bernie Williams out there. In right field, we got Ken Griffey Sr. for the Reds. He hit 336, 6 homers, 74 RBIs. Ken Griffey, that's a strong stat line. Paul O'Neill hit 317 with 24 and 116. Personally, the stat line favors O'Neill, but I like Ken Griffey in this matchup. He played a heck of a right field offensively, hitting 336. Paul O'Neill, 317. O'Neill more of a power guy. Griffey more of an on-base guy at 401. Advantage Griffey. So where's that put us? So we got the designated hitter because there was one used in the World Series. That gentleman was Dan Dreesen, who hit 247 with 7 and 44. And then you had Darryl Strawberry, who hit 247 with 24 and 57. So maybe a slight advantage to the New York Yankees there, but really a bit of a toss-up as neither one of them ultimately was, very, very good. But breaking it down here, we got 1, 2, 3, 4 in favor of the Yankees, and then 5 or 6 in favor of the Cincinnati Reds. 5.5, whatever you're doing there on that last one toss-up. So slight advantage Cincinnati Reds in regards to the lineup and the offense. Let's see, moving now to the rotation. How would things line up in the rotation? You'd have Gary Nolan, Pat Zachary, Fred Norman, and Dan Gullett for the Cincinnati Reds. Those would be the 4 starters used in the best of 7. And then obviously Nolan, Zachary, and Norman going 5, 6, and 7. On the New York Yankees side, you got Andy Pettitte, David Wells, David Cone, and Orlando Hernandez, better known as El Duque for the New York Yankees. I think this is advantage Yankees. Just looking at the statistics of the pitching staff, Andy Pettitte, 200-plus innings. He did have a 4.24 ERA this year, so this was not one of his best years in the regular season. David Wells, 3.49 ERA. David Cone, 3.55. El Duque, the lowest of the bunch at 3.13. So the names and the careers ultimately played better than the year did on paper for the pitching staff, because from the Red side of things, Nolan was 3.46 ERA, Zachary was 2.74, Norman 3.09, and then Gollett at 3.00. So on paper, things line up to be advantage Reds. But knowing what we know about each person's career, knowing how in the postseason things typically played out for the Yankees, I'm going slight advantage New York Yankees in regards to the rotation. In the top four, it's closer than you would think as a millennial, again, reading these names, knowing every one of them for the Yankees and none of them for the Reds. But breaking it down, the Reds there are hanging around more than we think. Transitioning over to the bullpen, we have the closer, Mariano Rivera, a 1.91 ERA, of course, first ballot Hall of Famer, unanimous Hall of Famer, closer, New York Yankees. But he's followed up by Ramiro Mendoza, who had a 3.25 ERA. And then you have Jeff Nelson with a 3.79 ERA. Those are the top three bullpen arms for the Yankees. For the Cincinnati Reds, we had Raleigh Eastwick, 2.09 ERA as the closer. Pedro Barbone, a 3.35 ERA. And then Manny Sarmiento had a 2.06 ERA. So almost a toss-up there out of the bullpen. Mariano Rivera, got to give the Yankees the slight edge, knowing what we know now. Obviously, the future of his career, the next 10, 15, 20 years, continued to be a solid career, beyond solid. It was the best career by any relief pitcher we've ever seen. So you got to go advantage Yankees there. But that's where you continue to look at some of the fundamentals and some of the background in regards to baseball, the non-flashiness. Looking back at the squads, the Yankees had 1 Gold Glove winner this year. The Reds had 4. So defensively, the Reds have the clear advantage in regards to balls in play and errors and potential for things like that. Offensively, we discussed it, maybe 6-4 Reds advantage. Well, when you include the designated hitter, the Reds had an OPS of over 129. The Yankees' OPS, as good as their offense was 116. So advantage for the Reds offensively, advantage for the Reds defensively, and then the pitching is advantage Yankees. Well, over the course of 7 games, I think this would be a long, drawn-out series. Pettitte and Wells, who would have home field? Let's go 76 Reds would have home field advantage. I think they would have the better regular season record than the 98 Yankees, because the Yankees were dealing with the 04 Sox and the 70 Orioles. The Reds didn't really have a tough competition in the Central. So that means the first 2 home games, Pettitte and Wells versus Nolan and Zachary, you split there. You go back to New York, you split there, you come back, Nolan wins at home, Wells wins at home, and then you're going Game 7 with Norman and Gollett versus Cone and Hernandez in the bullpens. Rivera comes out, he gives you some options, but Eastwick, Bourbon, that's a little bit deeper than Mendoza. So if Cone's not dealing, El Duque leaves a couple up in the zone, you would have to go to Mendoza, who gets hit around. And I think the 1976 Reds are the best team in the history of Major League Baseball. I think the Reds win in 7 games. I've certainly seen arguments for the Yankees, but as I was doing research, as I was breaking down position by position, I think the defense comes into play here. I think the Reds offense would put the ball in play, wouldn't strike out a ton, so would put pressure on the Yankees defense, and their defense, not having the amount of Gold Glove winners that the Reds do, would make a couple of different errors, a couple key mistakes, lead to some unearned runs, which could be the difference ultimately over the course of 7 games, where the Reds pitching is just good enough to get the deal done. But Joe Morgan, Pete Rose, Johnny Bench, Ken Griffey Sr., it's just a loaded ball club. The Big Red Machine is something that I would love to learn more about. That's a teaser for our topic there in segment number 6 as we'll conclude today's episode. But that wraps it up, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to say thank you for listening. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for interacting during our Best of the Best segment over the course of the past month. Mispronouncing some names, you guys reaching out, telling me how to pronounce the names from back in the day that I was missing, things like that, having conversation around who's better, who's not. If you want to go back and listen once again to where we ranked every single team, please do so. head back to the backlogged episodes. But that was a ton of fun. The 76 Reds outlast the 1998 Yankees in 7 games, and they are crowned the best team in Major League Baseball history, according to yours truly, Kevin Mahalik, here at the GSMC Baseball Podcast. But let's pause now for another word from one of our sponsors, a word from one of our sister shows. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about money in Major League Baseball and some of the losses that they think ultimately are going to be inflicted. And then we're going to touch on the draft a little bit as well. So stick with us here. We got more quality content coming. This is Kevin Mahalik and the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Are you looking to get your college football fixed? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, as always, Kevin Mahalik, and if you're a Yankees fan, I apologize. You're probably a little fired up right now. Even if you're listening to this, you probably turned the podcast off after you heard the 76 Reds won the best of the best and are now the best team in Major League Baseball history over the 98 Yankees. But deep breath, Yankees fans. Like I said, your murderer's row, your team's in the 20s, could have potentially been named best of the best. We tried to keep it more recent, and runner-up isn't so bad. So I appreciate everybody listening in the greater New York market. Hopefully you didn't turn everything off and abandon ship when I picked the Cincinnati Reds. But that was a lot of fun. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. But now I wanted to get into a continued conversation around some of the money that's being discussed in the return to play proposal for baseball, ultimately where they see things moving forward, and discuss kind of why they're really pushing for some revenue sharing with the Players Association. So a report has come out, according to ESPN here, that Major League Baseball told players that their prorated salaries would contribute to an average loss of $640,000 for each game. Over an 82-game season in empty ballparks. So baseball has flat out come out and said, we're going to be running in the red this year. We're absolutely going to be losing money, but running in the red is better than not running at all. So we're going to go out there and do this. But to kind of break down some of the continued economics that would take place without fans, without getting too much into the weeds here. This is why teams are saying that salvaging a season would still cause a $4 billion loss. And based on a breakdown of some of the numbers, would give major league players 89% of the revenue brought in. And the owners want 50-50. Well, right now, according to reports and algorithms and statistics, it's going to be 85-15 in regards to what the players are getting. So the owners are asking the players to concede a ton of money so they can continue to try to stay above water here. And this is where it breaks down in regards to team by team. The New York Yankees, looking at the top of the list here, the Yankees alone would have $312 million in local losses when calculating their earnings before interest, before taxes, depreciation. New York's figure includes $100 million towards bonds that finance the new Yankee Stadium. The Dodgers were at $232 million in local losses. Next up was the New York Mets, $214 million. The Chicago Cubs, $201 million. I'm not going to read all 32, but I'll kind of go through the major metropolitan areas here. The Cubbies, negative $201 million. The Red Sox, minus $199. All right, they're all minus. I'm just going to say the number from here on out. Minus $188. The Nationals, 166. Philadelphia Phillies, because they have a good local television contract, 159. Houston Astros, 148. St. Louis Cardinals, 136. And if you're looking at this on the bright side of things, the Detroit Tigers were at the top of the list, the bottom of the list, however you want to say it, at negative $84 million. The Orioles at negative $90. And these are the teams that aren't getting a lot of fans to begin with. So they've been running at a very optimum performance pace when it comes to financially and cut costing and things like that. But the Pirates, negative 91. The Rays, negative 91. D-backs, 107. Angels, 110. A ton of money is just going to be lost here. And Major League Baseball has come out and said that 2019 revenue, percentage-wise, it was 39% local gate and other in-park sources, tickets, beers, parking, all of that stuff. 25% central revenue, merchandise, that side of things. 22% local media, 11% sponsorships, and 4% other. So there's teams that are looking at huge losses here in regards to if they would cancel the postseason. It looks like the postseason brings in $780 million. 370 by Fox, 310 by Turner, 27 by ESPN, so on and so forth. It's just a ton of money that these teams are looking at losing this year with even having baseball. These are with having games. So without having games, it's minus billions of dollars in regards to lost revenue. But that's where the discussion comes, and they're hoping some of the transparency within the ownership and within baseball, that if they come out and say, hey, after doing all the math, after breaking everything down, if we pay you guys your prorated version of your salary, you're going to make 85% of all the revenue we have. We're going to make 15%. We're going to be running in the red, and then we're not going to have any money to pay you guys. So that's where they're going to have to come to an agreement and meet in the middle, because if they get paid this year, that doesn't mean there's going to be money left over next year. That doesn't mean that free agency, that anybody's going to be able to get paid, because if every single team is running in the red, yes, you're going to have people with a rainy day fund to pay the top-end talent. Don't get me wrong. I think your top 1%, your Mookie Betts, your JT Realmuto, I think those individuals still get their money. But that second-tiered person, that Andrew McCutchen level type contract, that A.J. Pollock level type contract, even the Jake Arrietas of the world and the pitching of the world, Garrett Cole would still get his money, but I'm not sure Patrick Corbin would see as much money. I don't know if Blake Snell is going to get enough money. It's just a lot being left out there, and possible future income is certainly going to be affected by what's happening this year and what type of agreement they come to. Because if you get greedy now, the owners are, we talk about what's the word? The red alert of the word collusion. Oh gosh, don't talk about that. Tisk tisk. Well, that's certainly going to be taking place if they can't come to an agreement and all of these owners are losing all of this money. And, basically we're going to say, we're not paying these guys. We're not paying any of them. Mookie Betts wants $400 million. Well, nobody offer him more than $250. And I know that's not allowed, but you can't argue and shake your head that you don't think even a little bit of that is currently taking place to begin with. So going to be fascinating to see the follow-up conversation. You guys out there, you've probably heard Blake Snell's comments by now. He was on Twitch basically having a conversation that after taxes, after travel, after the discount, and now another pay cut, he's really not making a ton of money, and he's the person who's risking his life, so to speak, to be out there to put the product out there. His communication and his method of delivery maybe weren't the strongest, but the sentiment and the message is something that you're hearing from a ton of Major League Baseball players. So it's going to be fun to watch, how this plays out over the course of the next couple of weeks. Stay tuned. But wrapping up this segment here, one last conversation around Major League Baseball and the draft. Talking about delaying it till July. Yes, no, who knows? Well, reports are now that it is going to be confirmed for June 10th and 11th, which that corresponds with when they're trying to get everybody to report back June 10th, which doesn't make sense because you don't want to have them on the same day because the media is going to be all over baseball coming back to the field, and then you're going to want the media all over the draft. So push back them coming back until after the draft so you can hold the media during the draft and get everybody talking about it, and then how you're returning right after the draft, continue the momentum, continue the conversation. This is just Media 101 that baseball has to continue to improve upon as a member of the media, to have the draft, then have everybody report not long after. So baseball has the headlines for an extended period of time in the month of June into the month of July. Come on, guys. You got to be listening out there in Major League Baseball. But 2 days, June 10th and 11th, round 1 and compensatory picks. So a total of 37 picks will be made on the first day, which leaves 123 picks for day 2, rounds 2 through 5. It will be held remote. So they listened to the podcast. They heard the feedback about the NFL draft, some of the positives, some of the negatives. They sent camera kits and other things to prospects who ultimately they think will be picked high in the draft, specifically on day 1. I think that's a great idea. You have to continue to get these guys on Zoom, on FaceTime, get into the living room, see who they are as people, get behind the curtain, whether it's a high school kid, a college kid, whatever it may be. Everybody's being affected differently, and I think that behind-the-scenes look, if it's well done, can be a very positive thing. But let's try to stay away from the sap stories. The NFL came out, said they're going to self-scout some of the behind-the-scenes stories and the background they tell on some of these players. It was a lot of dark places and a lot of X happened, which led me to Y and Z, and it's just like, man, come on, let's be positive here. Something good just happened. We don't need to be negative Nancy coming down on these kids moving forward. But the MLB draft, 5 rounds, June 10th and 11th, done all remote. I think it's a good move by baseball. I think they need to put access to it, somehow get it on ESPN. It can't be on the Major League Baseball network when people can't see it. It's got to be out there in national news, and it's got to be before guys come back. So postpone pitchers and catchers 2.0 until post-draft and work the system as best as possible. But that wraps it up for the 5th segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. As always, this is episode number 189 of the Baseball Podcast as we're moving and grooving our way towards 200. Stick with us here. We're going to pause for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows. But coming up in our 6th and final segment, I'm going to talk about documentaries about the game of baseball that I want to see. Everybody just finished watching The Last Dance. Michael Jordan, the final episodes aired last night. If you're listening to this on Monday here, well, I was thinking about which baseball guys do I want to see documentaries about. And there's a few good ones. So stick around. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Hello, and thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, as always, as we're wrapping up today's episode, number 189 of the Baseball Podcast. It is Monday, May 18th, and that means last night on the 17th, you guys, as well as myself, we finished watching The Last Dance documentary. The Michael Jordan documentary that broke down the Bulls' second three-peat, but really the entirety of the Bulls' dynasty was mixed in there. It talked about the first three-peat, then him going to play baseball, then the second three-peat, wrapping up with his shot against the Jazz and going on into the future. And it got me thinking, because in previous episodes we talked about Jordan's baseball experience and Terry Francona talking about how he thinks he could have been a productive Major League Baseball player based on his work ethic, the amount of swings he took, his performance going straight to Double-A after taking 10, 15 years off, going right into baseball. The reason Jordan was at Double-A and not Single-A or rookie ball was that the media complex at the Double-A level was the only one big enough to corral that circus. If they would have sent him to Single-A or rookie ball, there would have been too much media, and they wouldn't have been able to maintain the safety of Michael, and they were concerned about that. But watching the GOAT, the documentary, the Last Dance, and wherever you stand on the Jordan, LeBron, whoever it may be debate, it got me thinking too, what baseball documentaries do I want to see done? ESPN is teasing the documentary about McGwire and Sosa, and that was at the top of my list, thinking about it, going back to 1998 and that home run chase. How does nobody beat a home run record of Roger Maris, number 61? Nobody does it for how many years? 80 years, whatever it was exactly. And then two guys do it the exact same year, and they're battling each other. I remember 1998, I was living outside of Dallas, Texas, at a high school, South Lake Carroll. If you guys are football fans out there, excellent high school football program, you know the name. But in the paper every day, it was a home run tracker. It was the baseball box scores that you read every day in the sports section, and then they had the pitching stats, the hitting stats, and then they had two boxes, McGwire home runs and Sosa home runs. And every morning, I remember looking and being like, did they hit another one? Did they tick one? 42, 40, 44, 43. They were always neck and neck, and McGwire was usually one or two ahead of Sosa, but they would always improve and always click up, and it was just fascinating. And I remember where I was when McGwire hit that line drive down the left field line, barely over the wall. I was on the phone with a buddy of mine back home up here Northeast going, oh man, did you see that? It just happened. I remember it to this day. It's 2020. And I remember where I was in 1998 when that happened. So that's going to be a fantastic documentary coming up by ESPN as I'm looking forward to their continued excellence in this world. But next up, Barry Bonds. Let's get one. Barry Lamar Bonds. Let's go through his career, the ups and downs, the twists and turns, his relationship with the media, his relationship with his teammates, his relationship with everybody, how he wasn't loved. He was overshadowed in 98 by Sosa and McGwire. Ken Griffey Jr. got a little bit more love than he did, and through it all, he's just trying to break records for home runs in a single season, as well as for a career. I remember where I was when he broke McGwire's record. I was sitting in the office, back at a house doing some homework. They had a small TV at my parents' office that I was watching it on ESPN because it was a West Coast game, so it was super late at night. And it just, it's another one of those things that would be fascinating to kind of see some behind the scenes and details of Barry's career and their stories being told. I was just listening to a podcast where Barry was one of the first users of the Sam bat. You guys are baseball fans, so you know Marucci, the Sam bat out there. Well, Barry knew the bat to the exact ounce when it was regards to weight. He brought the owner of the Sam bat, the CEO, in, and he said, hey, your bats are off. They're heavy. They're light. This one's 31.7. This one's 32.1. This one's 31.9. And he liked them all 31.8. And there you go. The Sam bat owner brought his weight scale in, and Barry nailed each and every one of them. I don't know if he had a scale at home or he just knew off the top of his head, but there's stories like that people are telling that are just fascinating behind the scenes where you could really see how good this guy truly was. Another one I thought about was Ichiro. Give me something on Ichiro, the hit king coming over from Japan, absolutely raking. Is he going to be able to do it at the major league level? That's not Major League Baseball over there. Those hits don't count. He shouldn't have the most hits all time. Well, he comes over here and just absolutely continues to rake. He has over 200 hits for, I think, 10 or 15 straight years. The 2001 Mariners, one of the best ball teams ever, 116 wins MVP. You got Griffey Jr., you got Alex Rodriguez, you got a ton of guys, Edgar Martinez on that squad. Give me something behind the scenes of Ichiro, how it was in Japan, how the media was over here when he first came over, and then ultimately the continued success of him and his teammates. Yes, they fell short in the postseason, but that would just be fascinating and awesome to watch. Continued conversation in regards to Ichiro and his domination of hitting a baseball. Let's see here. There's a couple others I thought about, but I like it where the people are still alive and can communicate on what was happening. People are talking about the curse of the Bambino, Babe Ruth, Red Sox, Yankees, something like that. But you can't interview a lot of people who are around, or the Billy Goat when it comes to the Cubbies and their 86-year drought. I like to keep it more current and conversation around. This is where it went down behind the scenes. So another one I had was the Yankees dynasty of the 90s into the 2000s, 1998. We just talked about them earlier in this episode, possibly the best ball club ever. And then the rise and the fall, how they left in free agency trades, how everybody kind of went on their separate ways. Would have been fascinating to kind of see the rise and fall of that. Compounding it, Big Red Machine. There's another one discussing everything out there. The 70s Reds, Pete Rose, those guys would be fantastic to reminisce and look back on. We really haven't had a dynasty or a team, motto or name known as the Big Red Machine. It's known as like a years of teams, not just a team, but kind of an era of baseball. And to have a conversation like that is fascinating. I mean, even now with the Astros, you don't have a blank era. You just know they're fantastic. The Yankees, the Dodgers, all of the above. The Big Red Machine kind of engulfs everything that was going on there in the 90s. And then one outside the box, I saw this one online reported by somebody else, but it would just be fascinating to discuss. But talking about the Giants and Dodgers and the decade of the 2010s. We broke it down a little bit earlier, but I have it right in front of me. The Dodgers, 919 and 701. So over 200 games, over 500, 7 NL West titles. The Giants, 821 and 799. So 22 games over 500. The Dodgers over 200 games, the Giants 22 games, and yet the Dodgers only have 2 pennants and didn't win it all, and the Giants won 3 titles. So Clayton Kershaw, a Hall of Famer, 3 Cy Youngs, top 5 7 times. Well, when it comes to the postseason, 9-11, 4.43 ERA, clearly struggles. Then you go over to Madison Bumgarner, who is very good. He hasn't won a Cy Young. He hasn't really been in the top 5 or top 10, but postseason, 8-3, 2.11 ERA, 3 World Series championships in that era, in the 2010s for the NL West. Just amazing how during the regular season, one team can just dominate, and then when you get your chance, the other one just takes full advantage of it. Reminds me of the Miami Marlins, if you want to do one about them. They've been to the playoffs twice as an organization, and they have 2 World Series titles. So don't let them get hot. Don't let them get into the dance, because they're going to end up winning the whole thing. So if you guys have one out there that you're thinking of that I missed here, I'm open for suggestions. Reach out to us on social media. Go to Facebook, go to Instagram, go to Twitter. Follow the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Follow the GSMC Podcast Network. Shoot me a DM. Shoot me a message saying, hey, this would be another great documentary. I'll share some ideas if we get them here on the show, as well as rate and review the podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, whether it's Spotify, Apple iTunes, Stitcher, any of those, you can leave a 5-star review. That goes a long way. If you write a review, I'll read it here on the show. We'll get you some airtime. We'll have some conversation around it. But that's going to wrap up this edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I had a lot of fun talking to you guys today here on Monday, May 18th. We are a week from Memorial Day, a week from the unofficial kickoff of summer, as summer doesn't usually come until the middle of June, but I obviously say Memorial Day is summer. At this point, college baseball would be over. We'll be playing in summer leagues out there around the country. A lot of minor league teams, a lot of backwoods teams, having a lot of fun out there. So continue to hang in there, though. Ladies and gentlemen, we're getting close. If all goes well, we're going to have baseball, at least spring training 2.0 games to talk about within 3 to 4 weeks. So you're going to have to start listening to me talk about real baseball instead of making up who ultimately I think the best team ever is. But I appreciate you guys listening, as always. Seriously, guys, share the love. I'm sharing it with you. You guys can share it with others out there. Continue to spread the word. I very much appreciate it. I am Kevin Mahalik. This is the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Have a great night, everybody. We'll talk to you later this week.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.